The lone man's hand froze inches from the horse's bridle. A voice had just spoken his name from inside the empty stable. A dead man's voice. The widow heard it too, and she knew by sunset armed men would return to take everything she had left. The Montana winter of 1878 showed no mercy. Martha Coldwater's breath formed white clouds as she stepped into the stable before sunrise, her boots crunching on frozen ground. 6 months had passed since they buried Jacob, and every morning felt like walking through a dream she couldn't wake from. The creditors had taken everything. The furniture, the tools, even the chickens. All that remained was Sovereign, the magnificent black stallion her husband had spent his final months training, with an obsession that worried her back then. Now she understood why. 3 riders appeared on the horizon as pale light broke across the hills. Martha's stomach twisted. She recognized the lead horse before she could make out the rider's face. Silas Drummond from the Bannock Loan Company, flanked by 2 hired men who looked more like prison guards than clerks. They'd sent letters. She'd ignored them. There was nothing left to take except Sovereign, and she'd die before letting them have Jacob's last gift to her. Drummond dismounted with the casual arrogance of a man who'd done this 100 times before. He pulled out a folded document, his breath stinking of whiskey even at dawn. Mrs. Coldwater, this is a legal foreclosure notice. Your husband signed papers using this animal as collateral. We're here to collect. That's a lie, Martha said, her voice steadier than her hands. Jacob never gambled, never borrowed against Sovereign. Well, his signature says different. Drummond nodded to his men. Take the horse. The 2 men moved toward the stable. Martha positioned herself in front of the door, knowing it was useless, but unable to step aside. One of them grabbed her arm, not rough but firm, moving her out of the way like she was furniture. Drummond walked past her into the stable, reaching for Sovereign's halter. That's when the voice came. Get your hands off my property. Every person in that yard froze. The voice was deep, commanding, unmistakable. It was Jacob's voice, clear as church bells, coming from somewhere inside the stable. Martha's knees almost buckled. Drummond jerked his hand back like he'd touched fire, his face draining of color. The 2 hired men were already backing toward their horses, their eyes wide with terror. What kind of trick is this? Drummond stammered, but his voice cracked with fear. The voice spoke again, colder this time. No trick, Silas. Just a dead man who knows what you've been doing. Drummond spun in a circle, searching the rafters, the stalls, every shadow. His 2 men were pressed against the stable wall like they'd seen the devil himself. Martha stood paralyzed, her mind racing through impossible explanations. Jacob was 6 feet under the frozen ground. She'd watched them lower his casket. She'd thrown dirt on his coffin with her own hands. Show yourself, Drummond shouted, but his hand shook as it hovered near his gun. The voice came again, this time with details that made Drummond go rigid. You doctored those papers, Silas. You forged Jacob Coldwater's signature 3 weeks after his funeral. You've been doing it to widows all across the territory, haven't you? Taking what doesn't belong to you. One of the hired men bolted for his horse. The other followed without a word. Within seconds, both were galloping down the trail like demons were chasing them. Drummond stood alone in the yard, his face switching between fury and fear. This is some kind of parlor trick, he said, but he was backing toward his horse now. Ventriloquism or some carnival nonsense? Tell Cornelius Hyde that I left evidence, the voice continued. Documents. Proof of every fraudulent loan, every forged signature, every widow you've robbed. If Martha loses this property, those papers go to the territorial marshal. Drummond's eyes narrowed. You're hiding someone here, that's it. Some hired actor. Then search the property, Martha heard herself say, finding her voice at last. Look everywhere. When you don't find anyone, ride back to Bannock and tell your boss that Jacob Coldwater protects what's his, even from the grave. For a moment, Drummond looked like he might actually search. Then Jacob's voice spoke one more time, and what it said made the color drain from the lone man's face. It was something private, something shameful. Details about Drummond's own debts and his secret drinking that nobody should know. Drummond grabbed his horse's reins and mounted in one swift motion. "This isn't over, Mrs. Coldwater. I'll be back with the sheriff. We'll see how your ghost stands up to the law." He kicked his horse hard and disappeared down the trail in a cloud of dust. Martha's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, her whole body shaking. The silence that followed felt louder than the voice had been. She stared at the stable, at Sovereign's dark form visible through the doorway. "Jacob?" she whispered. Nothing. She pushed herself up and walked into the stable on unsteady legs. Sovereign stood calm in his stall, his dark eyes watching her with what looked like intelligence. She moved through every corner of the building, checking behind feed sacks, climbing into the loft, searching for hidden compartments or speakers or anything that might explain what had just happened. There was nothing. No one hiding. No mechanical devices, just her, the horse, and the impossible memory of her husband's voice speaking words he couldn't possibly know. Martha sank down on a hay bale, her mind spinning. Either she was losing her sanity or something beyond her understanding was protecting her. She thought about the last months before Jacob died, how he'd spent every spare hour in this stable working with Sovereign in ways that seemed obsessive. He'd been secretive about it, almost protective. When she'd asked what he was doing, he'd just smiled and said he was making sure she'd be taken care of. She'd thought he meant the horse's value as a working animal. Now she wasn't so sure. Sovereign moved in his stall, and Martha's breath caught. For just a moment, in the way the light fell, she could have sworn she saw Jacob standing there, his hand on the horse's neck. Then she blinked, and there was only the stallion watching her with those knowing eyes. "What did he teach you?" she asked the horse softly. Somewhere in the distance she heard hoofbeats, more riders coming. Word would spread fast in a territory this small. Everyone would want to see the widow with the haunted stable. Martha stood up slowly. Whatever was happening here, whether madness or miracle, she needed to understand it before Drummond returned with reinforcements. Because one thing was certain. That voice had bought her time, but time alone wouldn't save her. By noon, half of Bannock knew about the widow whose dead husband spoke from beyond the grave. The other half thought she'd lost her mind from grief. Martha watched from her window as small groups gathered on the road, pointing at her property, but coming no closer. Fear kept them at a distance. Deputy Tom Garrison arrived alone just after sunset. Martha recognized him immediately. He'd been one of Jacob's few real friends, a young man trying to be honest in a territory built on claim jumping and broken promises. He rode up slowly, his hand nowhere near his gun, and dismounted with deliberate care. "Mrs. Coldwater," he called out, "I need to ask you some questions, that's all." Martha stepped onto the porch. "Did Drummond send you?" "Drummond's holed up in the saloon, half drunk and telling stories about ghosts. The sheriff sent me to investigate." Tom removed his hat, and she could see genuine concern in his face. "People are saying things, Martha, strange things." "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." They sat at her small kitchen table, the only piece of furniture the creditors had left. Tom listened while she told him everything, leaving nothing out. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said finally. "Neither do I." Martha met his eyes. "But I heard Jacob's voice, Tom. Clear as I'm hearing yours now. Could be someone playing tricks. Someone who knew Jacob well enough to mimic him. Then search the property. Search everywhere. You won't find anyone." Tom did exactly that. He spent an hour going through the stable, the small barn, even the root cellar. He came back shaking his head. "There's nobody here but you and that horse." "I know." Tom sat back down, rubbing his face. "Drummond claims the voice knew things about him, private things." It did. Things Jacob would have known. He was always watching people, noticing details they thought were hidden. Martha, if this is some kind of scheme to avoid foreclosure, you think I'd fake my husband's voice? The anger in her words surprised them both. You think I'd use Jacob's memory like that? No, Tom said quietly. No, I don't, but I need to understand what's happening here. Martha stood and walked to the door. Come to the stable. I'll show you. They walked across the yard in the fading light. Sovereign stood alert in his stall, and Martha felt a strange pull to try something. She didn't know what she was doing, but instinct made her call out, "Jacob, if you're here, Tom needs to hear you. He's trying to help." Silence stretched out. Tom shifted uncomfortably, then impossibly, the voice returned. "Tom Garrison, you still hiding whiskey bottles behind the loose board in your room at the boarding house?" Tom went white. He stumbled backward, his hand finally moving toward his gun. "That's not possible. Nobody knows about that except—" He stopped, staring at Martha. "Jacob caught me with a bottle when I was 16. Made me promise to stop. I never told another soul." The voice spoke again, warmer this time. "You kept that promise, Tom. Made something of yourself. I was proud of that." Tom's hand dropped from his gun. He looked at Martha, then at the empty stable, then back at her. His mouth opened and closed without sound. "Now do you believe me?" Martha asked. Tom nodded slowly, his face pale. "God help me, I do, but believing it and understanding it are two different things." He took a shaky breath. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. When Drummond sobers up, he'll come back. And he won't come alone." "I know." "Then we need to figure out what the hell is really happening here," Tom said, his voice steadier now. "Because ghost or not, you're going to need more than a voice to stop what's coming." Martha spent the next 3 days living in the stable. She watched Sovereign constantly, studying every movement, every sound. Tom visited each evening, bringing supplies and warnings. Drummond was gathering men. The sheriff was asking questions. The whole territory buzzed with talk of the haunted widow. On the 4th morning, she finally saw it. Sovereign shifted in his stall, and a low sound came from his chest. Not a whinny or a snort, but something deeper. The rafters seemed to catch it, amplify it, shape it into something that almost sounded like words. Martha sat up straight, her heart pounding. She stood and moved closer to the horse. He watched her with calm intelligence. She thought about the hours Jacob had spent here, the secrecy, the obsession. She thought about the way the voice only came when Sovereign was present. "It's you," she whispered. "Somehow, it's you." She started experimenting. She tried speaking to the horse, giving commands, making requests. Nothing happened. Then she remembered something Jacob used to do, a low whistle he'd used to calm the stallion. She tried to mimic it, her lips clumsy with the unfamiliar pattern. Sovereign's ears pricked forward. He moved to a specific spot in the stall, and when he breathed out, that same resonant sound filled the space. This time, Martha heard it clearly. The wooden structures Jacob had built into the rafters, positioned just right to catch and shape the sound. The way Sovereign's breathing created vibrations. It wasn't magic. It was training. Brilliant, obsessive, impossible training. She spent the entire day testing her theory. By sunset, she'd figured out 3 different whistle patterns, each one making Sovereign move to a different position, each position creating a different sound. Some were just noise, but some, when the horse was positioned exactly right and breathed at exactly the right moment, sounded eerily like human speech. Tom arrived and found her laughing and crying at the same time. "He taught the horse," she said, her voice breaking. "Jacob spent his last months teaching Sovereign to respond to whistles. When the horse moves and breathes in certain ways, the sound bounces off these wooden pieces Jacob built. It creates the illusion of speech." Tom climbed into the rafters, examining the carved wooden resonators hidden among the beams. "This is incredible. How many patterns did he teach?" "I don't know, dozens, maybe more. Each whistle makes Sovereign do something different. Some just move him around, but some—" She demonstrated, and Jacob's voice spoke about the weather. The words aren't random, Tom said, climbing down. Jacob must have trained specific responses for specific situations. He was dying, Martha said softly. He knew what would happen to me after he was gone. The creditors, the vultures. So he built me a weapon, a guardian. Tom was quiet for a moment. Does this help you? Knowing it's not really Jacob? Martha looked at Sovereign, thinking about the months of work her husband had put into this gift. It's more Jacob than any ghost could be. He thought of everything. He knew Drummond would come. He knew I'd need protection. Then we need to figure out all the commands, Tom said. Because Drummond's not done. I heard he's bringing 6 men tomorrow, armed. Martha felt her stomach drop. 6 guns against 1 widow and a trained horse. Against 1 widow, 1 deputy, and the most ingenious defense I've ever seen. Tom pulled out his notebook. Show me every whistle pattern you know. If we're going to survive tomorrow, we need to master whatever Jacob left us. They worked through the night, mapping out commands, discovering new responses, understanding the full scope of what Jacob had built. With each new pattern, Martha felt her husband's presence more strongly. Not as a ghost, but as a man who'd loved her enough to spend his dying days creating the impossible. By dawn, they were ready, or as ready as they could be for what was coming. The riders appeared just after sunrise, 7 men instead of 6. Drummond had brought reinforcements. Martha stood on her porch with Sovereign beside her. Tom positioned near the stable door with his rifle across his lap. Her hands were steady now. Fear had burned away during the night, replaced by something harder. Drummond dismounted first, flanked by men who looked like they'd killed before and would again for the right price. One wore a marshal's badge, though Martha didn't recognize him from any legitimate territory office. They spread out in a loose semicircle, cutting off any escape route. "This ends today, Mrs. Coldwater," Drummond called out. "We're taking the horse and the property deed. Your little ghost show won't work on armed men in daylight." "The property's not yours to take," Tom said, standing up slowly. "I've been reviewing the loan documents. That signature's a forgery." "That's a serious accusation, Deputy." The fake marshal spoke up, his hand resting on his gun. "You got proof?" "Working on it." Drummond smiled. "Then you got nothing. We're acting on legal authority." He nodded to his men. "Take the horse." 3 men started forward. Martha raised her hand and whistled, a sharp pattern that cut through the morning air. Sovereign moved to a precise position and Jacob's voice rang out across the yard. "Drummond's been stealing from widows for 2 years. The marshal knows. They split the profits." The fake marshal's face darkened. "That's enough of this circus trick." Martha whistled again, and Sovereign shifted. The voice continued, calling out names, dates, amounts stolen. Details that made Drummond's men exchange glances, information that shouldn't exist, but clearly did. "She's got papers hidden somewhere," one of the hired guns muttered. "Someone feeding her information." "Then search the property," Martha said. "Search everywhere. You won't find anything but a trained horse and a widow who won't give up what's hers." 2 men moved toward the house. Martha whistled a different pattern, and the voice spoke directly to them, naming their crimes, their secrets, their fears. 1 man stopped dead. The other kept coming until Jacob's voice described his wife's affair in explicit detail. He turned around and headed back to his horse. "Shoot the damn horse," Drummond shouted. "End this now." The fake marshal drew his gun, aiming at Sovereign. Tom's rifle came up fast, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. Martha's mind raced through the whistle patterns Jacob had taught her, desperately searching for anything that could stop a bullet. Then Tom did something unexpected. He fired a shot into the air and shouted, "That horse is territorial property, part of an ongoing investigation into loan fraud. Anyone who harms it answers to the real marshal in Helena." It was a bluff. Martha could see it in the way Tom's jaw tightened, but some of the hired guns hesitated. They were criminals, but they understood the difference between local corruption and territorial law. Drummond's face twisted with rage. "You're protecting her with lies. And you're here with forged papers and a fake badge, Tom shot back. Who do you think the more territorial marshal will believe? For a long moment, nobody moved. 7 armed men against a deputy and a widow, but doubt had crept into the equation. Martha could feel the moment balancing on a knife's edge. Then the fake marshal made his choice. He aimed his gun not at Sovereign, but at Martha's head. Drop the rifle, deputy, or she dies where she stands. Tom's finger tightened on the trigger, but Martha knew he couldn't shoot fast enough. She was about to die, and all of Jacob's genius couldn't stop a bullet already pointed at her heart. The standoff stretched into terrible silence. The gunshot that shattered the silence didn't come from the fake marshal. It came from the road behind Drummond's men. Everyone spun around to see a rider in a long coat, smoke still rising from his rifle. Behind him, 3 more riders emerged from the tree line. "Lower your weapons," the man called out. His voice carried authority that made even the hired guns hesitate. "I'm Marshal Clayton Voss from Helena. Anyone still pointing a gun in 5 seconds is under arrest." Drummond's face went from rage to panic in an instant. The fake marshal tried to run for his horse, but 2 of Voss's men cut him off. Within minutes, all 7 of Drummond's crew were disarmed and lined up in the yard like school children caught stealing. Martha's legs nearly gave out. Tom lowered his rifle, looking as shocked as she felt. Marshal Voss dismounted and walked straight to Tom. "Deputy Garrison, your telegraph was received yesterday. We rode through the night." He turned to Martha. "Well, Mrs. Coldwater, I apologize for what you've endured." "Telegraph?" Martha looked at Tom. Tom had the decency to look embarrassed. "I sent it 3 days ago, after I searched the stable and found what Jacob had hidden." "Hidden what?" Martha's mind raced. "Come inside," Voss said. "All of you need to understand what your husband was really doing before he died." They gathered in Martha's small kitchen. Voss pulled out a leather document case and spread papers across the table. Martha recognized Jacob's handwriting immediately. "Your husband was an informant," Voss said quietly. "For the past year, he'd been documenting loan fraud across 3 territories. Drummond, the Bannock Loan Company, corrupt officials, names, dates, forged signatures. He was building a case." Martha stared at the papers, her hands shaking. "He never told me. He was protecting you. If Drummond had known Jacob was gathering evidence, your husband would have disappeared long before that mining accident." Voss paused meaningfully. "If it was an accident?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Martha felt sick. Tom spoke up. "I found the documents hidden in the stable wall behind one of those wooden pieces. Jacob marked the location with a specific scratch pattern. The voice, the training, everything was designed to protect Martha until someone could get this evidence to the right people." "The voice told me where to look," Tom admitted. 3 nights ago, when I was alone in the stable, I whistled by accident, and Jacob's voice gave me directions, row by row, board by board." Martha thought about her husband spending his final months not just training a horse, but building an elaborate system to protect her and expose his killers. The weight of it crushed her chest. Voss looked at Drummond through the window. "We have enough evidence to arrest everyone involved. The loan company will be dissolved, all fraudulent debts canceled. Your property is safe, Mrs. Coldwater." "What about the voice?" Martha asked. "What happens when people find out it's just a trained horse?" "Do they need to know?" Voss smiled slightly. "Sometimes a legend serves justice better than the truth. Let them think Jacob Coldwater speaks from the grave. Might make other corrupt men think twice before cheating widows." Martha walked outside and stood beside Sovereign. She could see Drummond in shackles, his empire crumbling. She thought about Jacob's sacrifice, his genius, his love. Tom joined her. "He saved you twice, once with the training and once with the evidence." "He saved more than me," Martha said, watching as Voss's men led the prisoners away. "He saved everyone Drummond would have hurt next." Sovereign nudged her shoulder gently, and Martha leaned against the horse's warm neck. She didn't need to whistle for Jacob's voice anymore. She could feel her husband's presence in every carefully planned detail, in every moment of protection he'd built into his final days. The legend would live on. But Martha knew the truth was even more powerful. 3 weeks after Drummond's arrest, Cornelius Hyde came to Martha's door. Not with hired guns or legal threats, but alone, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He'd managed to distance himself from Drummond's crimes, claiming ignorance of the fraud. The territorial investigation couldn't prove otherwise. "Mrs. Coldwater," he said, removing his hat, "may I have a moment of your time?" Martha considered slamming the door. Instead, she stepped aside and let him enter. Tom had warned her Hyde would try something, better to face it head on. Hyde sat at her table and opened the briefcase. "I'll be direct. I want to buy your horse. $5,000 cash money today." Martha's breath caught. $5,000 was more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of ranching. It was safety, security, a future without hunger or fear. "Why would you pay that much for a horse?" "Because that horse is worth 10 times that amount." Hyde leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "The talking horse. The guardian of the widow. People across 3 territories know the story. I could exhibit Sovereign in San Francisco, Denver, Chicago, charge admission, make a fortune. He's not for sale? Think about what that money means. You could leave this place, start fresh anywhere you want. Buy land, build a real ranch, never worry about creditors again." Martha looked out the window at Sovereign grazing in the yard. She thought about taking him on tour, whistling commands while crowds gasped, turning Jacob's final gift into a carnival act. "I need time to think." "Of course." Hyde stood, leaving papers on the table. "The offer stands for 1 week. After that, I move on to other opportunities." After he left, Martha sat alone with the contract. $5,000. The number seemed unreal. She could rebuild everything Jacob had dreamed of. She could honor his memory by thriving, not just surviving. That night, she went to the stable. Sovereign lifted his head as she approached, and she ran her hand along his neck. She thought about whistling one of the patterns, hearing Jacob's voice one more time. Instead, she just stood there in the silence. "He built you to protect me," she whispered, "not to entertain strangers." But the money pulled at her. Safety versus principle, security versus sentiment. She tried to imagine Jacob's response, but the only voice she heard was her own doubt. Tom found her there an hour later. Hyde made his offer? $5,000. Tom whistled low. "That's life-changing money." "I know. But?" Martha thought about Drummond being led away in chains, about the documents hidden in the stable wall, about Jacob spending his dying days training a horse instead of resting peacefully, about the purpose behind every whistle, every command, every carefully positioned piece of wood. "Jacob didn't build this to make money," she said finally. "He built it to keep me safe, to give me power when I had none. Taking Sovereign on tour, turning him into a show, it betrays everything Jacob intended. Even if it means struggling forever?" Martha met Tom's eyes. "I'd rather struggle with my integrity than thrive on betrayal." Tom nodded slowly. "Your husband chose well when he married you." The next morning, Martha burned Hyde's contract in her stove. She watched the paper curl and blacken, feeling both liberated and terrified. She'd chosen honor over comfort, but honor didn't pay for feed or fix broken fences. Sovereign whinnied from the yard, and Martha smiled despite her fear. She still had the most valuable thing Jacob had left her. Not a fortune in cash, but something worth far more. She had proof that love could reach beyond death, that genius could spring from devotion, and that some gifts were too precious to sell at any price. She had her husband's final masterpiece, and she was keeping it. Word of Martha's refusal spread through Bannock faster than wildfire. Some called her foolish, others called her proud. A third group, growing louder each day, called her a fraud. If she wouldn't demonstrate the horse publicly, they argued, then the whole thing must be a trick designed to avoid debt. The rumors poisoned everything. Merchants refused her credit. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. Even the minister suggested from his pulpit that honest Christians didn't traffic with the supernatural. Martha found herself more isolated than ever, trapped by the very mystery that had saved her. Tom brought the news on a cold Tuesday morning. The town council wants a public demonstration. They're calling it an investigation, but really they just want to see the show. Let them talk. Martha, they're talking about declaring you mentally unfit, taking your property for your own protection. Tom's face was grim. Hyde's behind it. If you won't sell, he'll find another way to get what he wants. That night, Martha barely slept. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She found Tom at the sheriff's office and told him to arrange the demonstration. If the town needed proof, she'd give them truth instead. Sunday afternoon, it seemed like every soul in Bannock gathered at the church grounds. Martha led Sovereign through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares. Tom helped her set up in the clearing, his presence a steady comfort. Hyde stood near the front, his face carefully neutral. The real Marshal, Voss, had stayed in town specifically to witness this. Martha was glad for his presence. She raised her hand for silence. You want to know about the voice? You want to understand what happened when Drummond came for my horse? I'm going to show you the truth, but you need to understand something first. What my husband built wasn't supernatural. It was genius. It was love. It was a dying man's last act of protection. She explained everything. The whistle patterns, the wooden resonators in the rafters, the months of training. She demonstrated, making Sovereign move through his positions, showing how sound and acoustics created the illusion of speech. She ran through command after command, Jacob's voice speaking clear and strong, proving it was real but explainable. The crowd was silent, mesmerized. Even the skeptics seemed moved by the sheer devotion the training represented. My husband knew he was dying, Martha continued, her voice breaking slightly. He knew what men like Drummond would do to me. So he spent his final months creating something impossible, not magic, not spirits. Just a man who loved his wife enough to build her a guardian from patience and intelligence and time he didn't have. She whistled one final pattern, and Jacob's voice spoke words she'd never heard before. Martha, if you're hearing this, then everything worked. You're safe. You're strong. And I'm so proud of you. Live well. Love again. Don't let my death stop your life. Martha's tears came freely now. She hadn't known Jacob had programmed those words. The crowd stood in respectful silence, many wiping their own eyes. Marshal Voss stepped forward. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years, but I've never seen devotion like this. Mrs. Coldwater has committed no fraud. She's protected herself with the gift her husband left her. Anyone who questions her sanity needs to question their own heart first. Hyde pushed through the crowd, his face red. This proves nothing. She's still using tricks to manipulate people. She's using her husband's legacy to survive, an old woman called out. Others joined in, voices rising in Martha's defense. The tide had turned. The demonstration changed everything. Within days, people who'd crossed the street to avoid Martha were stopping by with offers of help. A rancher donated feed. The blacksmith repaired her fences for free. The minister apologized from his pulpit, calling Jacob's devotion a testament to godly love. Hyde left town quietly, his schemes exposed and his reputation in ruins. The territorial governor himself sent a letter commending Martha's courage. But the greatest change was in Martha herself. She'd stopped hiding, stopped apologizing for survival. She stood in the stable one morning, running her hand along the wooden resonators Jacob had carved. Tom found her there, as he often did these days. Their friendship had deepened into something neither spoke about yet, but both understood. I've been thinking, Martha said, about what Jacob taught Sovereign, the precision, the patience, the intelligence required. What if I could teach other horses the same way? Tom smiled. You want to start a training business? Not tricks or shows, real training. Teaching horses to respond to complex commands, to work with their riders in ways most people think impossible. She turned to face him. Jacob proved it could be done. Why shouldn't I build on what he started? You'd be good at it. I'd need help. Someone to handle the business side, deal with buyers, manage the property. She paused, her heart beating faster. Someone I trust. Tom understood what she was really asking. I'd need to leave the deputy position. I know. People would talk. They already do. He stepped closer. Your husband's only been gone 7 months. Jacob told me to live well, to love again. He said not to let his death stop my life. Martha met Tom's eyes. He was right. Tom reached for her hand, hesitant, asking permission with the gesture. She took it, feeling warmth spread through her chest for the first time since Jacob died. We'll do this properly, Tom said. Court you the right way. Give people time to adjust. And then? Then we build the ranch Jacob dreamed about, together. Over the next months, Martha's reputation grew. She started with 1 client, then 5, then a dozen. Word spread about the widow who could train horses to do impossible things. She never revealed Jacob's full techniques, keeping the voice commands sacred and private. But the foundation of patience and precision, she shared freely. Tom resigned his deputy position and moved into the spare room, maintaining propriety while helping with the growing business. Slowly, carefully, they built something new from the ashes of grief. On the anniversary of Jacob's death, Martha rode Sovereign up to the hillside cemetery. She'd come here dozens of times, but today felt different. Final somehow, she dismounted and stood before Jacob's grave, the winter wind cutting through her coat. She pulled out a small whistle she'd carved herself, practicing Jacob's patterns until she'd mastered them all. I need to say goodbye, she whispered. She whistled the full sequence, every command Jacob had taught, every position Sovereign had learned. The horse moved through the patterns like a dance, and Jacob's voice filled the cold air one last time. Words of love, words of encouragement, words of release. When the final command finished, Martha felt something break loose in her chest. Not grief, but freedom. Thank you, she said to the grave, to the horse, to the memory of the man who'd loved her enough to spend his dying days ensuring her survival. Thank you for everything, for the gift, for the protection, for teaching me I'm stronger than I knew. Sovereign nudged her shoulder, and she smiled through her tears. I'm ready now, she told Jacob's headstone. Ready to move forward, ready to build the life you wanted for me. She mounted Sovereign and rode back toward the ranch, where Tom waited, and the future stretched out like an open trail. 6 months later, Martha's ranch had become something Jacob would have been proud of. 3 new corrals, a rebuilt barn, and a reputation that stretched across 2 territories. Ranchers brought their most difficult horses to the widow who worked miracles. She charged fair prices and delivered results that seemed impossible. Tom had proven invaluable, not just as a partner in business, but as something deeper. They'd married quietly in early spring, with only Marshal Voss and a few close friends present. The town had accepted it faster than Martha expected. Grief had its timeline, but so did life. Sovereign remained her closest companion, though she rarely used the voice commands anymore. They were too precious, too intimate for regular use. She'd taught Tom a few patterns, but most she kept to herself, a private language between her and the memory of her first love. On a warm June morning, Martha stood in the corral working with a young mare. The horse had been abused, skittish and dangerous, but Martha saw past the fear to the intelligence underneath. She worked with the same patience Jacob had shown, the same belief that trust could heal almost anything. Tom watched from the fence, his face carrying the contentment of a man who'd found his place. You've got a gift for this. Jacob had the gift. I'm just carrying it forward. No, Tom said gently. You've become something he always saw in you. You were never just surviving on his legacy. You were always this strong. Martha thought about the terrified woman who'd faced Drummond's guns, who'd nearly sold everything for security, who'd been too afraid to believe in her own strength. That woman felt like a stranger now. A rider appeared on the horizon leading a limping horse, another client seeking help. Martha smiled. The work never stopped, but she wouldn't have it any other way. That evening, after the client left and the horses were settled, Martha walked to the stable one last time. She stood in the doorway looking at the wooden pieces Jacob had carved, still perfectly positioned in the rafters. She pulled out her whistle and played the sequence just once. Sovereign moved into position, and Jacob's voice filled the space with words she'd memorized but never tired of hearing. I'm so proud of you. Martha closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Then she tucked the whistle away and walked back to the house where Tom had coffee brewing and plans spread across the table for expanding the ranch. She was done looking backward. Jacob's gift had saved her, protected her, and taught her that love could transcend death. But the greatest gift wasn't the voice or the training or even Sovereign himself. It was the belief that she deserved to survive, to thrive, to build something beautiful from grief. She'd been a widow defined by loss. Now she was a woman transformed by love, both the love that had ended and the love just beginning. She'd learned that some endings were really transformations, that protection could become empowerment, and that the greatest tribute to those we've lost is living fully in their absence. As snow began to fall softly outside, Martha sat beside Tom and looked at their future mapped out in ink and dreams. Sovereign's whinny drifted through the window, and she smiled. She was no longer the widow whose dead husband's voice had saved her. She was Martha Garrison, horse trainer, ranch owner, survivor, and she was finally, truly free. If you enjoyed this incredible story of love, loss, and transformation, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have more amazing stories from the Wild West coming your way that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Don't miss tomorrow's tale of courage and redemption.